JFK assassination. No question there was a patsy there used by Marcello. Not so much Marilyn Monroe's. You get to Dorothy Kilgallen's death. And I was able to prove that this woman, when JFK died, and it was personal, she went to LA. She interviewed Jack Ruby.
Faith in God.
She interviewed Jesse Curry. Now, what about Mr. Sirhan Sirhan? I had never bought the idea that this young Palestinian was able to orchestrate the death of Robert Kennedy, for which surprised me, of Sirhan's and his innocence. Even went to the prison where he was, hugged him, and said, "I know you didn't kill my brother." He'd helped Sirhan get a parole three or 4 years ago that was revoked then by this governor of ours in California. I had always been curious about the assassination of Robert Kennedy, 1968. Now remember, 62, 63, 65, 68. 4 icons of the 20th century, all, and including Kilgallen, as we'll talk about, was murdered. All right, so I thought to myself, how about the connection between those 4 deaths? And I got to thinking, wait a minute, look at the JFK assassination. No question there was a patsy there used by Marcello. Then you get to not so much Marilyn Monroe's. You get to Dorothy Kilgallen's death, and I was able to prove that this woman. I just want to backtrack just a minute so people know who she was a little bit more. When JFK died, and it was personal, she went to LA. She interviewed Jack Ruby. She interviewed Jesse Curry. His book is right over here. He told her that the shots came from the overpass. So she didn't believe any of that junk about Oswald alone or any of it. And then she decided, wait a minute, Ruby told her I think kind of confessed to her in terms of what happened. We will never know what he exactly told her, unfortunately, because when she died in 1965, her JFK assassination files and her the book manuscript that she was writing for Random House, a tell-all book, were both missing, and we'll get into her death in just a minute, or yes, we can. So Dorothy decided, whatever Ruby told her, to go to New Orleans, and that's where Carlos Marcello ruled, and that empire of his stretched on into Dallas, of course, and that's how he ended up using Ruby and using Oswald. So I got to thinking about that, and I went ahead and one day I thought, how about Dorothy Kilgallen's death? I have proved that this gentleman named Ron Pataki, who was a romantic interest of her later in her life, when her husband and she were estranged. He was an alcoholic. He was the only person that she shared her JFK assassination information with. She's the only one who was able to get Jack Ruby's testimony at the Warren Commission. She shared all that with him. And then I was able to prove that he had leaked it to the wrong people because he had gambling debts. That'll come into the Robert Kennedy assassination. And Marcello was able then to pressurize and compromise him into setting up Dorothy Kilgallen for the kill. And what happened with that was that when she was getting too close to the truth and she told her friends, if the wrong people knew what I know about the assassination, it would cost me my life. I bought a gun and all of that. About not too long later, she was found dead in her Manhattan townhouse, in a bed she never slept in, wearing her hairpiece, her eye makeup and everything. Looked like she was going on a date. They found a bottle of Seconal next to her bed. They sent a junior detective there. He decided that she had died of an overdose. And what was leaked to the press was that she died of an overdose of drugs, overdose of barbiturates, circumstances undetermined. Now, unfortunately, that particular communique to the media made everyone believe she was a druggie who killed herself. And that ruined Dorothy's reputation. In fact, when I took up working on The Reporter Who Knew Too Much, I could find nothing about her since 1965 because it tainted her reputation, and I've been trying to restore that reputation ever since. So wait a minute, Mark. You got a patsy with JFK. You got a patsy now with Dorothy. How about with Bobby Kennedy's death? So I started looking into that, and we're almost done here to this particular point in time. I thought to myself, wait a minute, who had the strongest motive to to set up Robert Kennedy for the assassination? Oswald he used. He compromised Ron Pataki. Now, what about Mr. Sirhan Sirhan? I had never bought the idea that this young Palestinian was able to orchestrate the death of Robert Kennedy. So the first thing I did was look into Marcello's situation at the time. He had become more than a billionaire. I found new FBI records that showed he was not only doing all of the illicit things out of New Orleans, but he was actually importing narcotics from South America and selling those. Very rich man. But more than anything, think about it. Robert Kennedy in '68, what was he doing? He was running for president of the United States. Now, Marcello knew that Robert Kennedy knew that Marcello was the one who orchestrated John Kennedy's death. So what is he thinking? He's a smart man. He's thinking, wait a second, if Bobby Kennedy becomes president of the United States, the first thing he will do, and I've been able to corroborate that with other accounts in books and a personal interview, he'll come after me. So I thought, okay, now I know the motive. How am I going to fit this in with the whole situation with Sirhan? So I was able to come up with, and I assume you looked at it. This always amazes me. It took me 6 years to get through Purdue University, almost 6 years to get through law school. I am not the smartest person who ever lived. Now, I do believe that I'm a dogged investigator like Dorothy Kilgallen was, and so I go after these things. But I was trying to figure out this whole situation, and so I tried to think, okay, how about Marcello? How could he have been connected some way or another to this Sirhan guy? And I looked into it, and I found out that Marcello knew a man named Mickey Cohen, who ran the rackets on the West Coast, including at the racetracks. And I found this video of a man named John Shear. I mean, that had been on the internet for years, and nobody had ever used it whatsoever because they always just figured it was Sirhan, and that was the end of it. Well, John Shear in this video, he's a paddock captain at Santa Anita Racetrack, south or I think it's a little bit east too of LA, and that was a guy that took care of the horses after they raced and so on and so forth, and some very famous horses raced there, Seabiscuit and others. So I looked into that, and John Shear then, his account said that one day at the paddock area, a small, short guy walked up to him and said, "I need a job," and said, "I need a job." And so John Shear said, "Well, I have only hot walking, and it pays $200 a month." And that basically, as readers will see, is the key to uncovering the whole situation with the death of Robert Kennedy. It's amazing sometimes. Dorothy Kilgallen was really good at looking at clues, small clues that make a difference. Well, this was one, because Shear went ahead and hired this man, and he worked there for a while, and he got to know him. And at one point, the Palestinian Sirhan even got all upset about Robert Kennedy and Israel and stuff like that. And that's in this particular video, which makes you think that he had motive to have gotten rid of Bobby Kennedy. But anyway, and that's not true. But anyway, so then we move ahead to just a few days before Robert Kennedy is dead, and the paddock captain Shear, and his wife are at Hollywood Park, and they see Sirhan Sirhan walking up some steps. He's got two what Shear called hoodlums on either side, kind of controlling him. He's got a brand new suit on. He was unemployed, and they're looking at each other like, wait a minute, what's going on there? And they then went home and talked about it and everything. And the next thing they knew, on the television in LA was the arrest photograph of Sirhan Sirhan, and it said, "Do you know this man?" And so John Scheer decided, his wife had him go ahead and call the authorities at Hollywood Park, tell them what he knew. I know them. I know about him and all of that. And he expected them then, he basically said that to the authorities, let the FBI and the LAPD, by the way, the LAPD was run by J. Edgar Hoover's friend, Parker, whatever his name was. So they got Hoover coming in there again for cover-ups, and thought that they would get in touch with. Well, they never did. They never got in touch with John Scheer, except for the fact that he and his wife, every time they picked up the phone for almost a year, there was a click. So they knew it was being tapped. So that kind of circled around everything that I had done, because you have a pattern then here. And if you look at these deaths, even including Marilyn's to begin with, because Bobby Kennedy's involved, you see a pattern there. And then you can look at these in connection with each other. And by doing so, then that opens an awful lot of windows as to what really happened. I'd like to ask you what you thought of the theory with regard to Sirhan Sirhan, because I think you saw in there that Robert Kennedy Jr. has been a big cheerleader for which surprised me, of Sirhan's and his innocence. Even went to the prison where he was, hugged him, and said, "I know you didn't kill my brother." He'd helped Sirhan get a parole three or 4 years ago that was revoked then by this governor of ours in California. But what did you think about that setting up Marcello, or setting up Sirhan as the patsy there, and how that fit into the pattern? Do you buy that at all, Tim?
Well, the things that stuck out certainly were the fact that, both in terms of people reporting and what they heard, and then just where bullets were discovered and things like, there were too many shots fired for him to have just shot his one gun. And they were too fast probably for him to shoot and then reload and shoot. And then, of course, the angle at which Kennedy was shot, the autopsy, I think, showed that the angle was from behind him and Sirhan was in front of him. I don't think anyone disputes that he was there, right? I don't think there's, and he certainly was found there with a gun. I think he probably was proven that he did shoot, at least, right? I mean, he was one, if not the person, he was certainly one of the people who shot. But yeah, I mean, anytime you have one person that gets all of the blame and some of the physics behind it can't seem to line up, at least with that story, then you sort of work, I mean, as you did, then you work backwards and go like, okay, well then what could have happened and who would have orchestrated it? And, even if you don't have the answer immediately, you can at least poke holes in the single shooter theory there.
Mickey Cohen, that was Marcello's buddy. They'd been friends for a long time and everything. He's the guy who then set up, I think you read in the book, set up Sirhan Sirhan for all of that happened that way. But, for instance, these little things that I found that don't become big things. Mickey Cohen was the racketeer who handled all the gambling on the West Coast. Well, he handled a lot of the gambling at the Ambassador Hotel, where Robert Kennedy was killed. So he knew where everything was that way. But I don't want to go, if I may,